There are very few shoujo that I've actually taken the time to watch since I started getting into anime. Yet despite that, they tend to be some of the series that I enjoy most. And since starting this channel, there has been one series which has been recommended to me non-stop. It's an anime that I remember my sister loving when she was a kid, but honestly, when I tried to watch it, I just couldn't get into it, both because of how the show looked and its overuse of slapstick comedy. But seeing as it's being remade as of 2019, I thought it was probably a good time to check out its first season. So with that said, I think it is finally time that I dived into the world of Fruits Basket. Once upon a time, a god told the animals, "I invite you to the banquet I shall hold tomorrow." But the rat, who loved to pull pranks, lied to his neighbor the cat and told him that the banquet would be the day after tomorrow. On the day of the banquet, the rat rode on the ox's back and leapt easily down to arrive there first. And after him came the ox, the tiger, and all the rest, and they feasted merrily until dawn. All of them except the deceived cat. This is the story that our main character Toru is told by her mother in a flashback in the very first episode, and it lays the foundation of much of the story, as well as how characters will interact and telling us where their personalities will start. When Toru hears this story, she begins crying, sympathizing for the poor cat who had been fooled and excluded, and declaring that she will abandon her year of the dog and instead become a year of the cat, immediately putting Toru's empathy and kindness on display, and on the surface, these would typically be her defining personality traits through the entirety of the season. She's the kind of person who would quite literally give you the shirt off of her back in a snowstorm if she thought that it might make you a little bit more comfortable or the slightest bit happier. At the beginning of the series, I kind of wrote her off, if I'm being honest. She seemed like a typical image of perfection kind of character. The type whose greatest weakness or shortcoming could be summarized as she's too nice, or she's too supportive of others, almost sounding like a cheesy job interview. But I was so quickly swayed to being a huge fan of Toru's within just a few episodes. While, yes, she is too kind for her own good, that isn't really what's at the core of her character. Toru's most powerful and prominent trait is her readiness to try and understand, and more importantly, to accept others for who they are and what they are, regardless of what they have to offer. There's a line we see in the second half of the season that really stuck out to me as what is probably the underlying message for the entire series, and I think that Toru embodies that perfectly. There's a young girl named Kisa who's being bullied, and her teacher sends her a note that says just to try harder to make friends and to start loving herself, because if she can't find something good in herself, how could she expect someone else to do the same? And I think this is advice that we hear all the time in our own world. You need to start with loving yourself, and that appreciating who you are is the first step in others appreciating you. But sometimes that just isn't possible, and it's not the reality of how things work. One of our male leads, Yuki, tries to comfort Kisa by explaining that he went through similar experiences, and he asks, how are we supposed to find something good about ourselves? The whole reason we hate ourselves is because we can only see the parts that we hate. So forcing ourselves to find good points feels hollow, like we're making things up. It's not like that. That's not how it works. I think that it's only when someone says that they love you that you're able to start loving yourself. I think when someone accepts you, that's when you start feeling like you can forgive yourself a little and start to love yourself. And this is exactly the role that Toru plays within the story. Yes, there is the obvious romantic will they won't they vibes throughout the entirety of the season. You get these moments where you think, Toru and this character would be perfect together. I hope they fall in love. And obviously that is an important part of Fruits Basket. But what makes Toru so special is her ability to love everyone in a pure, selfless, and accepting way without ever even considering getting anything in return. Yes, in terms of her personality, aside from being a little bit ditzy, she is the stereotypical Miss Perfect. But the importance of the themes of acceptance within Fruits Basket allow her to shine in a truly beautiful way that lights up not only the characters in the story, but also those who are watching or reading it as well. Now, I won't go into every episode in the season, but I am going to discuss a few of the main ones and some major moments to help paint a picture of the characters and their development. The story proper begins as we see Toru leaving a tent which she is currently living in, and as she heads out for the day, she says goodbye to her mother, or rather a photograph of her which she holds to be her dearest possession. On her way to school, she comes across a house with Zodiac figurines on display, and she has a quick chat with a man named Shigure about how the cat is missing from the group, before the prince of her school, a boy named Yuki, emerges and offers to walk together with her. When they arrive at school, we're introduced to her two best friends, a delinquent girl named Uotani, and a girl with what seems like psychic powers named Hanajima. Despite these two clearly being feared by just about every other student to at least some degree, they are absolutely doting towards Toru. Where the other students saw a reason to be anxious in the two girls, Toru found best friends. After school, Yuki walks Toru part of the way home and they discuss the Zodiac a little bit more. More specifically, they get into Yuki's disdain towards the Zodiac cat. And after they separate, we get another glimpse of Toru's backstory. When she was 3, her father got sick and passed away, leaving her with her incredible, badass, and hardworking mother, someone who was so much larger than life that it seemed impossible that she might die too in something as seemingly random as a car accident. Later, learning that on some levels she resented or blamed herself for it, as this was the first and only time that she didn't say, "I'll see you when you get back," as her mother left. Afterwards, most of her family argued about who should take on the burden of bringing her into their home, and it was eventually decided that her very senile grandfather would take her. Not wanting to be a burden to someone living on a pension, Toru offered to pay her own tuition and living expenses. However, after a fairly short time together, he explained that this home would need renovation. He was going to stay with his daughter for a short time, but his daughter's home would be too small for Toru to join. So he asked her if she would be able to find a friend's place to stay at. She decided instead to buy a tent and live inside of it to avoid stressing out her friends' families. We jump back to the present, and while on a late night stroll, Yuki and Shigure come across Toru and her tent, offering instead to let her stay at their home for the night. She accepts, which seems to be for the best, as a nearby cliff collapsed and completely buried her tent, along with a picture of her mother inside. She tells Shigure about her mother and how she felt guilty for not seeing her off that morning, saying that she needed to do well in school because she promised her mother that she would get a diploma. As she falls asleep, she talks about how it doesn't matter if she was sick or if her house blew away. Regardless of what happened to her, she was just upset that she had let something happen to the photo of her mother. Yuki tells Shigure that at school you could never tell how much Toru was suffering. She walked around with a big smile and seemingly not a single care in the world. In the morning, Yuki brings her the photo which he dug up while she was asleep, and as Toru goes to thank him, they're interrupted when an orange-haired boy named Kyo drops through the ceiling and attacks Yuki. Toru tries to jump on Kyo to stop the fight, but as she does, a big, colorful cloud poofs around them, and where Kyo was standing is now laying a pile of clothes with a cat inside. Toru panics, picks up the cat, and tries to carry him to the hospital before immediately tripping and landing on both Yuki and Shigure as 2 more clouds suddenly appear, and they turn into a rat and dog, respectively. After her shock and amazement passes, they explain to her that they are part of the Soma family, and that there are members of their clan who are possessed by the spirits of the Zodiac, and if they're hugged by members of the opposite sex, they become exhausted, or in a few other special cases, they will turn into their respective animals for a short time before becoming human again, albeit they will be naked once they transform back. Honestly, there isn't all too much to gain from these curses, aside from what can sometimes be funky colored hair and being able to communicate with that specific species of animal. For example, Yuki used a small army of rats to dig up the photo for Toru. As we learn through the season, those cursed to be zodiac animals all tend to suffer in their own ways. They can never truly fit in, dating can become next to impossible, and there's always a feeling that if someone finds out that they turn into animals, they'll be frightened or sickened by them. And while Toru was certainly surprised, there is never a single moment in the season where she is sickened or non-accepting of any of them. And when there's a whole zodiac worth of somas who can't find anything but what they hate about themselves, it is the innate instinct to accept and welcome others within Toru which becomes her superpower and the driving force behind every bit of character growth in the series. From the end of the first episode on, Fruits Basket becomes a bit of a strange thing to look at on a macro scale, at least throughout the first season that I've seen so far. That's because there is very little actual plot development, and I'm using that term very loosely here. Yes, there are definitely bits and pieces of story which are making progress, but to this point we kind of have the head of the Soma clan, a boy named Akito, who's being painted as an overall antagonist. But he's rarely in the show, and we aren't exactly working towards a resolution at breakneck pace. We've seen mentions of a curse, and the question of if Toru is the one who will be able to lift that curse or not. But this seems to go beyond simply turning into a zodiac animal, in some way at least, and we just don't have any information on it yet. Instead of progressing towards the more grand scheme of things issues, Fruits Basket's first season acts as a revolving door of character introductions, bringing one member of the Zodiac after another to meet Toru. Up until the end of Season 1, I believe we've met 10 of them, plus the cat, although Akito seems to be involved directly in some way or another as well. Each new member of the Zodiac that we come across paints a different picture of what it means to be a Zodiac animal, how it affects them, how it affects their loved ones, and the sacrifices and duty that they need to endure. Equally as important, though, is a glance at Toru's role in helping those Zodiac members to heal, showing them that they are loved, to help them start to forgive themselves and find something about themselves that they can love. So I wanted to take a moment to talk about a few of the major characters, their development, and how they tie into the greater story. We briefly talked about Toru, but we will come back to her a little bit later, so let's move on to the Zodiac Signs for now with Yuki. Yuki's Zodiac animal is the rat, and while many of the animals seem to have very little connotation to them, the rat is definitely one of the standouts that has a lot of social weight on it. In the modern day, people tend to consider the rat Zodiac member of the Soma family to be gifted and personable, but in the story of the Zodiac Banquet, the rat is the one who deceived the cat, and as a result, Kyo blames Yuki for all of his misfortune. Similarly, the rat rode on the ox's back, so Haru originally blamed Yuki for people thinking he is stupid. While Yuki and Haru were able to patch things up in their childhood, things with Kyo never really managed to figure themselves out in the same way. While we don't have the entirety of Yuki's story yet, there have been very strong indications that he was tortured and held prisoner in some fashion, at least by Akito, something which haunts him. He opted to move away from the main family estate to get some kind of reprieve. However, he remains terrified of Akito. Between the torment he suffered through and the vilification he gets from select other zodiac signs, Yuki's self-worth was shattered. But this started to shift once Toru entered the picture, with the first big push towards healing taking place on the night they each stayed up to protect his garden from a typhoon. He says that she is a kind person for helping him, and she talks to him about how her mother taught her that each person's kindness takes a different shape, and that Yuki's is like a candle which lights up those around him, making them want to smile. It's from this point on that Yuki really starts trying in earnest to make new friends. For example, something as simple as learning how to play rich man, poor man so that he could be included in future group activities. Had Toru not become a part of his life, he would have likely stayed shelled away forever. Speaking of people who are sealed off, we have Kyo the Cat. The cat is considered an outsider, not belonging to the Zodiac properly. This was made even worse when you consider his true, monstrous-looking form which he hid from the world. We learn about Kyo's mother, who would only ever talk about how much she loved him, but at the same time would never let him go into public, and would always check to ensure that he was wearing his prayer beads to keep his true form hidden. He sees it as a phony love which existed out of expectation or duty. Maybe she had to love him because she was his mother, but each time that she checked him for his beads, he felt like she was rejecting the ugly side of him, only loving the good and not appreciating the whole package. His mom would go on to take her own life as she struggled with the stress of her situation, and nearly the entire Soma clan blamed Kyo for this. Kyo, however, blamed Yuki. The rat had fooled the cat and led to him being cursed in the first place, so of course it was his fault. Early on in the season, we see Yuki regularly fighting with Kyo. However, as they spend more time with Toru, the fighting comes to almost an entire stop towards the end of the season. Yes, they still argue every time they talk. They still say they hate each other, but they aren't actively fighting anymore, and they can at least be in the same room without a brawl breaking out. When Kyo's true form is revealed in the second to last episode, he tries to reject everyone around him, as he just sees people who don't accept what he really is, much like his mother had. But it's Toru's acceptance again coming to the rescue, and which opens Kyo's heart once more to other people. As I've said, we've met more than 10 of the Zodiac Signs now, and I could go into each of them in depth, but there are just so many who I just don't feel like we know enough about yet. For example, despite spending every single episode seeing Shigure, there's a dark side of him that we just have hints of with no real explanation. So instead of giving half-helpful looks into their development, I'm going to be skipping a few characters like Shigure the dog, Ritsu the monkey, Haru the ox, and Hiro the ram. Hopefully I can talk about them more in Season 2. If you all enjoy this video, I'm going to try and get that out as soon as I can. But the characters I do want to focus on here, though, are going to be Kisa the tiger and Momiji the rabbit together, and Hattori the dragon. Momiji and Kisa are going to be grouped together because they have very similar stories to tell. Or rather, their stories are opposite sides of each other. We mentioned in Kyo's section how his mother took her own life, but that isn't exactly a rare case in terms of Zodiac parents. In both Momiji and Kisa's case, we see mothers who are struggling to deal with their Zodiac child. Kisa's mother was so worn down by the stress of her situation that she was effectively a walking zombie. Having to worry about a child is hard enough, but when that child can randomly turn into a tiger, and that could lead to the end of your lives as you know it, it would be indescribable. Not even bringing into account just the idea of, hey, I have a kid that turns into an animal sometimes. That's not exactly super normal, and I can imagine how terrible that might be for a mother to deal with. Kisa was being bullied at school for her hair, her eyes, and all of the other Zodiac attributes that made her stand out. At some point, the kids just started ignoring her existence, only really taking note when she talked so that they could laugh at her. She knew how stressed her mom was already, so she felt like she couldn't go to her about it, and as a result, she just kept to herself until she stopped talking altogether. When her mom finally found out, she begins to scold Kisa for causing trouble for those around her, but Toru cuts in and talks about when she was bullied. We saw clips of this earlier in the series as well, with kids playing a game called Fruits Basket, the namesake of the show. In this game, they name each other items which they would want to find inside of a basket of fruit. Things that belong and are accepted, which if you've been paying attention up until now is pretty fitting for the series. Meanwhile, they would name her Rice Ball, something ordinary that didn't belong in a fruit basket. Toru felt like she couldn't bring this kind of thing up to her mother because she was so ashamed and afraid that her mom might stop loving her. It was the moment where her mother said, "It's okay," that Toru became so relieved that she began crying, explaining Kisa is probably just the same, also scared about losing her mother's love. On the other side of that coin, we have Momiji, similar but in a more extreme vein to Kisa's mother. Momiji's mother was also having a mental breakdown. Her son becoming a rabbit sickened her so much that she couldn't stand to live with it anymore. She found her way to Hattori, who has the ability to wipe memories. I know, we'll get into it later, don't worry. And Hattori asks her if she's sure that this is what she wanted, and she just responds that her biggest regret in life was giving birth to that creature. Between the characters of Kyo, Kisa, and Momiji, we have three very similar family dynamics which all stem from the same place. While being a Zodiac member is incredibly isolating to the individual, it also affects their loved ones as well, especially in those cases where they can't be accepted. And this, of course, leads us back to Toru, who was not only willing and able to accept and love these people who felt themselves to be unlovable, but she could also understand them to some degree. While her parents might not have resented her, she lost them all the same. And despite that, she was not only able to look forward each day with a smile, but she managed to spread that smile to others. Just like the Zodiac members, she was hurting. She is still hurting. But she never let that stop her from giving or receiving love. It never caused her to put up walls, and as a result, it gives her this incredible gift to build a door in the walls that other people set up. Now, the last Zodiac member that we're going to be taking a look at is Hattori. There were two members of the Zodiac that Toru was meant to avoid at the start of the series, the first being Akito and the second being Hattori. The reason being that if she was considered to be a threat, or if Akito felt like it, or if they thought she would spread their secret, Hattori would be forced to wipe her memories. This was done through some form of hypnosis and ensured that the family's secret would remain safe. We've discussed how being parents of the Zodiac members might affect you, but Hattori's case is unique so far, looking instead at how it affects those you choose to date or to marry. Hattori was a doctor of the Soma clan, and one day a woman named Kana began to work with him. While Hattori was typically a pretty pragmatic and melancholic guy, Kana managed to change how he saw the world and brightened his horizons, as she had an infectious sense of hope and kindness, giving him his own sense of hope for falling in love and having a future despite being a member of the Zodiac, even accepting him in his seahorse form. He eventually decided that he would ask her to marry him, but when they went to Akito for permission, Hattori was attacked, resulting in him going nearly blind in his left eye. Akito, of course, blamed Kana and filled her with guilt to the point where she became mentally ill, similar to Momiji and Kisa's mothers. To free her from this, Hattori would be forced to erase her memory of them ever being together, removing her guilt and leaving himself with the memory of what had happened. This weighs heavily on Hattori in general, but it was only once he meets Toru and sees that she holds the same free spirit and hopefulness that Kana had, as seen when she answers the question, what comes after snow, the same way that Kana did, that Hattori begins to heal himself. And that kind of leads me to my overall thoughts on Fruits Basket. I think the most powerful and impressive parts of the series was easily its characters. Just about every single character felt real and tangible, and as you see Toru helping the Somas, and the instances when you see her being this genuinely happy and appreciative person just for life in general, it lights you up as well. The more people that Toru met from the Soma clan, the more it seemed like she was becoming an integral part of their family, closer with many of them than they were with each other. However, this isn't a one-way street. As she begins to love the members of the Soma clan, they begin to love her too. And in these moments, they're each able to start forgiving and finding good things in themselves to love. She wasn't just healing a family, she was joining it. And in doing so, she found a place where she truly belonged. A place where she could stop being just a rice ball waiting to be placed inside the Fruits Basket. This was a little bit of a different video, and if you guys enjoyed, please let me know so I can continue with this series with Season 2 of Fruits Basket, and maybe even dive into a few other series in the future. If you did enjoy this, remember to leave a like and subscribe for more content in the future, and if you have watched Fruits Basket before, tell me who your favorite character is in the comments down below. As I've said, I've only seen Season 1, so please try to avoid spoilers down there, but hey, if you did enjoy this and want to support the channel a little bit extra to ensure that more videos like this can come out, you can also check out the link to my Patreon through the description down below. As always, a big thank you to our current patrons with our Dai Yokai, Jacob Wiley and Iffy Babes, our Yokai, Amelia Hellman, NL Cruz, Janice Not Janice, and Lucifina Akuma, and our Hanyo, Anthony Hogan, Brittany K, Eli Hanem, Kiwi Dog, Love the Kiwi, Michael Grayco, Mochi Num Num, Nega Kitty, Samantha Olsen, Savage Camel, Simon Electric, Suki Neko, and Ziv. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, remember to stay excellent.